One of the things I feel in some leftist spaces is something I can only really describe as the grief of orphanhood. This is this sense that the elders are distant or gone, that folks are treading water and learning things from scratch. Now, if you feel like that, I have an historical perspective and perhaps a hopeful gateway to explore. Now, many of us don't have parents or elders who are as radical as we are. Many of us will have radicalized against our parents. I imagine some of us are lucky and we have radical elders, but they might be as far underwater as we are about how the landscape of fascism is changing so quickly, for instance. Or they themselves might need care, or what they really have energy for these days is grandparenting. And fair enough. But this kind of intergenerational dissipation or amnesia is not an accident. It's the result of the active suppression of radical movements and institutions. Just as an example, in 1940, there were 20,000 members of the Canadian Communist Party and 85,000 members of the Communist Party of the USA. Now, I'm not saying they would have saved the world had they not been smashed. I'm saying the fact they were smashed makes the possibility of people finding a radical support network feel like a dream. You see, liberalism is allowed to pass its inheritance on generation by generation because it validates and vouches for the continuity of capitalism. But radicalism is not permitted to pass its inheritance on. So if you don't feel like you have a network behind you, it's not your fault. It's not because you're bad at making friends or organizing or weird or you're the black sheep or autistic, although those things might be in play. No, the real problem is that the bosses harassed or exhausted or jailed or killed the radical grandparents. So I'm thinking a lot about answers to this problem, and the one answer I'll mention comes from my familiarity with the Catholic Church. And I'm not boosting it to promote Catholicism because I'm sure that this idea is transitive to many institutional religions that accommodate, however uneasily at times, their radical flanks. Islamic socialism, the Buddhism of Ambedkar, Jewish Voices for Peace, Black Baptists. These are radical movements that enjoy the institutional and intergenerational support that always comes more from religion than from political parties. So I was reflecting on my interview last week with David Inczauskis, the liberation theologian who's helping to lead protests against ICE in Chicago, and something has dawned on me, which is that liberation theology sprang out of a predominantly conservative church as an anti-colonial response to the white Jesus of European empire. And we have seen liberation theology surge in distinct historical waves. There was an explosion of popularity back in the beginning in the 1970s, quelled by a conservative Vatican in the 1980s, and undermined by CIA interventions as well. But now it's resurgent in the papacy of Leo XIV. The point is, liberation theology lives within the Catholic Church, which is a global infrastructure of community ritual and caregiving and resource sharing. It's very flawed as a church, complicit in colonial and fascist projects, harboring child abusers, still deluded by patriarchy and gender essentialism and homophobia. But to the extent that it can provide a home and material basis for the teaching of liberation theology, it looks like a kind of network of elders to me, a web of relations that connects families and generations to a shared liturgy. And when I talk to Catholics who feel this, or any religious person in a similar militant flank, I get a feeling of secure attachment with a larger history and family. So I guess now I'm wondering about the possibility of a radical politics practiced within a ritual tradition that baptizes babies, marries people, and buries them. A tradition that will survive repression because it has. A radical politics that speaks to and supports family and working life and the environment, not just through policy and strategy, but through myth and celebration. A discourse that, because it is religious, attempts to speak to every dimension of life and to earnestly answer or minister to those in grief who only see terrible times ahead.